just set up a front drag reel like this one. Now Andy, you'll notice in the shops and on the market there's a multitude of different sizes available, from tiny ultralight reels right up to big 8 size fixed spool reels. For lake fishing such as this, you don't need a big reel. Something like a 30 or 35 or 40 will do the job absolutely perfectly.
James, when I go into the shops, I notice there are front drag and rear drag reels. What's the difference between them?
Well, it's a good question, Andy, and it's all to do with the function of the drag. Now this is a rear drag, so you can see that the drag tension is adjusted at the back. A lot of people like this because it's very easy to get at and adjust the drag whilst you're playing a fish. The other style is a front drag, so the tension is adjusted by this knob at the front. I suppose it's worth mentioning about what the drag is. The drag can be adjusted to allow the pressure, that line is released from the spool, so when you're playing the fish, to slip. So the harder you have the drag setting, the harder it is for the line to pull off the reel. So you need to think about that, and we need to talk about how we'll adjust the drag to balance to the gear that we're using perfectly. But that's a front drag reel.
I also noticed double handles and single handles.
Again,
what's the difference?
Good point that I totally overlooked. It's really down to personal preference. Particularly on match reels, you'll find that you can have a double handle option, like on this Mat 1 reel. Double handles are really nice for ledgering because you can set the tip on the quiver tip. When we fish later, you'll see how critical that is to do it correctly, and the reel will stay in position. A single handle can have the problem of dropping back or moving when you don't want it to. So that's an advantage of the double handle.
Okay.
A disadvantage of the double handle is you lose some winching power. Because the handles are shorter, you don't get the same winching power as with a longer handle. So I'd say for any heavier work, like perhaps if you're carp fishing with the more powerful carp rod, then you want to use a single handle. My preference for match fishing is a double handle.
Okay, brilliant. James, what would happen if I was left-handed?
Another good point there, Andy. And you'll find that most reels on the market, particularly fixed spool reels, are ambidextrous. So you can actually change the side that the handle winds on. So I'm now changing it from left-hand wind to right-hand wind. So if I were left-handed, that's the option I'd have. And you can see how quick that was to do. So it just makes reels much more universal and able to be ambidextrous.
James, just got one final question on reels. Again, when I go in the tackle shops, I have a look at the boxes for information. I notice bearings and there's all different kinds of numbers. Could you just explain to me what they generally mean?
Yeah, sure. Well, the number of bearings is obviously important because an increased number of bearings will give you several benefits. It will give you more power in the reel and it will give you more smoothness. So when we signify how many bearings is on the reel, it kind of indicates the quality and price point of the reel. The more bearings you have in a reel, the higher price it's likely to be.
Okay.
And I do think one final point to mention, Andy, is about gear ratio. You might not even have noticed, but all reels have a gear ratio. And the gear ratio is the number of revolutions that the rotor makes per one revolution of the handle.
Right. Okay.
Now, so this reel is 5.2 to 1. So you get 5 rotations of the rotor for 1 turn of the handle. The higher the gear ratio, the faster the reel. The lower the gear ratio, obviously, is slower reel. For more powerful reels, you want a lower gear ratio, like the gears in the car. When you want to go up a hill or pull a load, you want a lower gear. Same story with reels.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks for that, James. James, I noticed you've got quite a few different reels on that bag there.
Yeah, I brought these along just to show you. I mean, there's obviously different styles of reels that you can use for coarse fishing. We've discussed front and rear drag reels, but I think it's also important to discuss a closed face reel. Closed face reels are very, very popular for float fishing. They have been for a long time, particularly when you're trotting floats on a river, a subject that we'll look at in another video. Just very quickly, the advantage of a closed face reel is the fact that you've got a push button release that engages the bail arm. And you've also got a very smooth pickup, which is automatic. So basically the reels can be handled one-handed. Very speedy operation. They're also very compact, so it's easy to control the line and use the reel when you're catching lots of fish when you're trotting on rivers. Another important fact is the fact that they're closed means that the line is not susceptible to being blown around the reel if it's windy. So closed face reels are actually still very, very useful on windy days when you're fishing on lakes such as this. The only limitation I'd say when it comes to closed face reels, they don't have as much power as modern fixed spool reels, and also they're limited to a certain extent by the distance you can fish. So if you want to fish at distance, a closed face reel isn't the best option.
Okay.
We've also got a very, very important reel and popular style of reel to discuss, which is a free spool reel. The free spool feature originally came from specimen carp fishing, but now is available on a multitude of different reels. Basically it means that you can set the reel in a free spool option while you're waiting for a run. Then when you pick the rod up and strike, you simply engage the reel and you're back to normal. So that's a free spool reel. It's actually very popular now for feeder fishing on lakes such as this, where you're fishing for carp and you're using a bolt rig. Then finally we've got a very, very specialised piece of kit, which is a Centrepin reel. You don't see too many of these around now, but they really come into their own when you're fishing on rivers, trotting big floats, but also on lakes where you're fishing close into the margins and you want to have the ultimate control on the fish when you're playing it. So that's quite a specialised piece of kit that you probably wouldn't use as a beginner, but something you might move on to at a later date.
Brilliant.